The Department of Justice is facing a brand new lawsuit regarding the Epstein files. Could this lead to the release of even more information regarding the man accused of being one of the most prolific sex traffickers of all time? Oh, and remember Ghislaine Maxwell? She's appealed her conviction to the United States Supreme Court. Is it going to work? Let's find out together. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. We have a new lawsuit related to the Jeffrey Epstein files we got to talk about. Everybody wants to know more about the deceased financier and convicted sex offender, the man accused of being one of the most prolific and infamous sex traffickers of all time, who died in a New York City jail cell in August of 2019. And that has been in the news a lot lately. Per a promise from President Donald Trump, there was this rush to release all of these files related to the investigation into his apparent sex trafficking scheme. And remember this, right? Back at the end of February, Attorney General Pam Bondi announced that the DOJ, the Department of Justice, would be releasing files connected to Epstein. And there has been a ton of interest in this, from everything surrounding Epstein's death to his connections to high-profile, high-powered people, whether there's a little black book of all of his alleged co-conspirators in this purported sex trafficking ring. You know, the client list sort of thing, even though the documents that have been released, even if somebody had a connection to him, doesn't mean they were aware or participated in anything illegal, just to make that clear. But when the documents were released to the public, it turned out that a lot of that information we already knew, we already had from court records. So then Pam Bondi publicly accused the FBI of hiding some of the key documents that were connected to this case. And there's been a little bit of reporting here and there, but not really a major secondary release of Epstein files. So that's basically a quick refresher on where we're at. And now we have to talk about this lawsuit. So Judicial Watch, which is a self-described not-for-profit that, quote, seeks to promote transparency, accountability, and integrity in government and fidelity to the rule of law, it also has been characterized by others as a conservative government accountability group, they have filed a lawsuit against the Department of Justice, the DOJ, regarding the Epstein files. This was filed in the United States District Court for D.C., and I'm going to lay it out for you, and then we're going to break it down. So the lawsuit states, quote, on February 21st, 2025, plaintiffs submitted a FOIA request to the Office of Information Policy, OIP, a component of defendants, seeking access to the following: all records of communication between Attorney General Bondi and any other individual or entity regarding any lists or other records depicting the identities of clients or associates of Jeffrey Epstein. This request includes, but is not limited to, all records related to the department's compilation, distribution, handling, and the potential public release of any such record or the information contained therein. Now, apparently, this request also referenced a Fox News article about how President Trump's return to office may signal the public finally being able to see Epstein's purported black book, maybe using this as support for why they want this information. And while Judicial Watch claims, the DOJ acknowledged they received their request, they claim there's been no further response. So then apparently, Judicial Watch submitted a FOIA, or Freedom of Information Act, request to another division of the DOJ, the criminal division. And this was for, quote, all records related to Jeffrey Epstein, born in New York City on January 20th, 1953, and died on August 10th, 2019 in New York City. It's pretty expansive and broad. But it gets a little bit complicated here, but basically Judicial Watch claims that this request was transferred to another component of the DOJ. There was an indication that Judicial Watch's request was duplicative of an earlier request, and Judicial Watch submitted an appeal, but essentially the bottom line, no further information or response. So then, Judicial Watch claims they submitted another FOIA request, this time to the FBI, also part of the DOJ, for the same information, by the way. And they claim that the FBI invoked a 10-day extension of time for, quote, unusual circumstances, but they've not received any further response there. So they end up sending another FOIA request to the FBI, but this one is a little different because it concerns FBI Director Kash Patel. Judicial Watch was seeking access to, quote, all records of communication between Director Patel and any other individual or entity regarding any lists or other records depicting the identities of clients or associates of Jeffrey Epstein. This request includes, but is not limited to, all records related to the department's compilation, distribution, handling, and the potential public release of any such record or the information contained therein. So same thing, according to Judicial Watch, they claim the FBI invoked a 10-day extension. never really provided any information. In a story where we're talking about transparency and information coming out and what the public has access to, have you ever thought about protecting your privacy online? Because I will tell you, you would be shocked at how much of your personal information is out there, like your address, your phone number. Do you ever wonder why you get so many spam calls and emails? That's because all this information is public. But that is where our sponsor, Incogni, comes in. So this is a service that helps you take control of your online privacy by removing your personal data from data brokers, the huge companies that sell and trade your information without your permission. So Incogni found all these data brokers with my information, but the good part is these data brokers have to remove you from their database if you ask them to. And that is where Incogni comes in. They contact those companies for you to get your online safety back. You don't have to do a thing, and then they alert you after the request has been completed. So I highly recommend giving Incogni a try. And right now, anybody who uses code SIDEBAR at incogni.com/sidebar gets 60% off. That's code SIDEBAR at incogni.com/sidebar for 60% off an annual Incogni plan. So now Judicial Watch is suing for violation of FOIA. They claim they are being irreparably harmed. They are asking the court to step in to order the DOJ to conduct searches for all of the records they're looking for, to produce any and all non-exempt records, to prevent the DOJ from continuing to withhold the records, and also granting them attorney's fees and litigation costs. Actually, the best way to explain it is what Judicial Watch's president Tom Fitton said in a press release. Simply put, the Justice Department needs to respond to public demands for transparency under law and release the Epstein files under FOIA. So with that, let me bring in former Palm Beach County State Attorney Dave Aronberg, the host of Legal AF. You can check it all out on YouTube, also the work that he does with the Midas Touch Network. Dave, thanks so much for coming on. Really appreciate you taking the time. Talk to us generally, let's start here, about FOIA and any limitations to FOIA.
Well, it's good to be with you, Jesse. Now, FOIA is pretty broad. The federal government has to give up public documents, but when it comes to classified information, sensitive information for a pending investigation, then they could be off limits. Now here, there's no pending investigation. The Jeffrey Epstein investigation is closed. Ghislaine Maxwell is in prison. Jeffrey Epstein is dead. And so there should not be a reason to withhold any documents. Now, the thing is, though, that Judicial Watch, which is known more for its conspiracy theories than it's for its legal work, they are under the belief that there is some master client list out there. And there is absolutely no evidence that that exists. And as far as Jeffrey Epstein's black book, yes, there was a black book, and we've had it since 2015. It's been out there. It's nothing new. We've seen lots of names in it. Doesn't mean that they're involved with sex trafficking, but we've had access to that for years. So I'm not sure if there's that many more documents available to the public that haven't been released already. There are but I don't think
so. That was his contact list, right? I think the idea of the black book is like, oh my gosh, his client list, right? The real client list, right? I think that's what they're referring to. But look, here's the thing. They're asking for two things here, right? They're asking for more information regarding Jeffrey Epstein. The request is quite broad. It's anything to do with him. I mean, we don't know more information about videos or writings or co-conspirators or clients. There is a lot we don't know, but they're also trying to understand what the collection process was, the research process was, the distribution process was for the Department of Justice, because that has been kept under lock and key. And ever since there was this call for transparency, they're asking what is going on behind the scenes. Can they get that information?
Well, yeah, anything that's out there, they should be able to give over. Now, what I believe is still behind closed doors is the information the FBI obtained from the raid on Jeffrey Epstein's Manhattan apartment. Remember, they had to use special methods to get into his safe, and then there were thumb drives that they took. And then there was some testimony later on in 2019 that some of the stuff went missing. And so that, to me, is the black box. That, to me, is the stuff that could still be revealed if they have it, and I believe they have it. And that's where I think Attorney General Bondi has told the FBI and Kash Patel, turn it over. You haven't given it up yet. I think that is the remaining stuff. But beyond that, as far as like the list of clients, I don't think that exists at all.
Let me just add this. Before there was that release, Pam Bondi released a letter that she sent to Kash Patel, the new director of the FBI, which said, I repeatedly questioned whether this was the full set of documents responsive to my request, was repeatedly assured by the FBI that we had received the full set of documents. Late yesterday, I learned from a source that the FBI field office in New York was in possession of thousands of pages of documents related to the investigation and indictment of Epstein. Despite my repeated requests, the FBI never disclosed the existence of these files, and then she requested their release and for Kaye Patel to look into this. So you take that as true. We don't know if it's true. You take it as true. There is more information out there, which makes me wonder, would Judicial Watch get it before the Department of Justice releases it to the public? And if Judicial Watch gets it, is Judicial Watch limited in what they can share with the public? How does it work there, Dave?
If there are documents that are out there, the Attorney General's committed that she's going to release it to the public. So the public would get it at the same time as Judicial Watch. And so Judicial Watch is not going to get anything that the public won't get. Judicial Watch is filing the lawsuit, and that puts pressure on the administration. But right now, Attorney General Bondi is trying to get the information out. That was her promise, and she has gotten a lot of criticism from the right wing of her party, and that's put a lot of pressure on the DOJ to get this information out. She has blamed the FBI for not being forthcoming, and so now the FBI is trying to get the information out. Remember, the FBI is headed by a Trump loyalist, Kaye Patel, so they're trying to get the information out. The only thing that they may try to slow down, withhold, is anything that deals with the boss, the president. And although it's been widely reported that Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein knew each other and were friends for a while, there's no evidence that Trump engaged in any child sex trafficking or any sex acts with Jeffrey Epstein's young women. There's no evidence of that, just like there's no evidence that Bill Clinton did either, even though Bill Clinton went on Jeffrey Epstein's plane multiple times. So a lot of this is a smokescreen where you have prominent individuals mentioned in the Black Book or being associated with Jeffrey Epstein without any evidence that they were engaged in anything illegal.
Yes, that's true. But I will also say it could be they're trying to redact certain things that need to get redacted. And I know there's a whole back and forth about what should be redacted. Do you think the FBI's response is interesting, saying we need a 10-day extension for their unusual circumstances, and then, we don't really hear anything? Do you think the responses to Judicial Watch, or the lack of responses to Judicial Watch, make sense?
Well, Ghislaine Maxwell's trial in 2019, the FBI agents testified that some of the stuff that they obtained from the raid on Jeffrey Epstein's Manhattan apartment has gone missing. And I think that's an embarrassment for the FBI if that is the case. And that opens up lots of conspiracy theories. So I think perhaps that's what we're dealing with, where the FBI is frantically looking for this stuff because they don't want to have to come before the public and Judicial Watch and say, sorry, the stuff you're looking for, it's missing, it's disappeared. Because we've seen with Jeffrey Epstein's death, how many conspiracy theories flow from that. So I think that's the reason for the delay.
Do you think, Dave, that it is strange that we've heard this quiet? Do you think that the judge will look at this, the court will look at this and say, I'm going to grant this relief here? Because it's quite extraordinary relief. I mean, the idea of granting everything related to Jeffrey Epstein, is the judge going to tailor the relief? Do you think, when would we get a decision about this? How long before the Department of Justice would have to comply with a favorable ruling to Judicial Watch? Just talk to us about the procedure of this.
Judicial Watch is like a bee, once they sting, they die. And a lot of these lawsuits, they have the sting of the announcement, the lawsuit, and then just fades away, it goes away. So I don't think that this lawsuit's going to amount to much. I think that the Attorney General is going to release everything in their possession. I think that the FBI is going to have to either find the documents and release them or admit that they lost them, and that'll be an embarrassment. But I think that most of the documents that people are interested in have already been out there for years, and the final document that everyone is dying for, that client list, does not exist. So I think this whole thing is going to amount in a lot of disappointment for people who expect that there's some smoking gun out there, a list of all the Democrats who are part of this child sex trafficking ring. No, this is reality. There's a lot of bad things that went on. We know about almost all of it. The parts that we don't know may either be gone, missing, but I do think that if the FBI and the DOJ have them, they're going to release it. There's so much pressure on them from their own wing of the Republican Party that they are going to release this stuff if they have it.
And this lawsuit won't add further pressure to them. So in other words, that you believe that they're going to release everything before they actually have to provide a meaningful legal response to Judicial Watch.
Yeah, the people who are the most active in the MAGA movement are breathing down the necks of the DOJ and the FBI. They're breathing down their necks because this is a priority for them. They think there's a mass conspiracy, and if they don't get information, they're going to revolt. And the leaders, Pam Bondi, Kaye Patel, Donald Trump, they want to keep these individuals at bay. So they're going to release whatever they can unless it's missing.
Okay.
And then they're going to have to admit that it's missing. And that'll be bad, but I think they're going to be truthful about it.
Now I want to ask you about this. This is another interesting component of this, because this all comes at the same time that Epstein's apparent accomplice, Ghislaine Maxwell, who's been described as Epstein's girlfriend, right-hand woman, madam, appealing her conviction for sex trafficking to the U.S. Supreme Court. So Maxwell, as we know, is serving a 20-year prison sentence right now. She was convicted in December of 2021 of sex trafficking and enticing and transporting minors for purposes of illegal sex acts. But she claims that she shouldn't have been prosecuted, that she is protected, that she is immune from prosecution because of a non-prosecution agreement that was arranged in Florida for Jeffrey Epstein back in 2007 between him and federal prosecutors. Because we can't forget what happened, right? There was a grand jury that ended up indicting him in 2006 on felony solicitation of a prostitute. There has been long arguments about why that was the only thing he was facing. Why didn't prosecutors pursue more aggressive charges? Why was this the only one? And we know what happened, right? The Palm Beach Police Department chief, the lead detective, they were particularly troubled by this prosecution, so they refer the matter to the FBI, who brings it to the assistant U.S. attorney. So we're talking about the feds. And in the end, I believe in 2007, 2008, Epstein and prosecutors work out this deal where he pleads guilty to state charges of solicitation of prostitution and procurement of minors. He's sentenced to just 18 months in prison, but serves only 13 and spends most of the time in a work release program. Can leave the jail to work at his office, then go back to jail at night. He avoids federal charges. He had to register as a sex offender as well. This is the whole sweetheart deal. But Maxwell's attorneys argued in their petition, quote, despite the existence of a non-prosecution agreement promising in plain language that the United States would not prosecute any co-conspirator of Jeffrey Epstein, the United States, in fact, prosecuted Ghislaine Maxwell as a co-conspirator of Jeffrey Epstein. Now, she had argued her position with the Federal Court of Appeals. They rejected it, saying even if this Florida agreement did protect her, it didn't extend to New York, where she was charged and convicted. So now she wants the Supreme Court to take up the case to resolve whether the arrangement could apply to her in another district. Defense attorney David Marcus wrote in the court paperwork, a defendant should be able to rely on a promise that the United States will not prosecute again without being subject to a gotcha in some other jurisdiction that chooses to interpret that plain language promise in some other way. Dave, your take.
Well, the courts have ruled that this non-prosecution agreement, which was entered into between the Southern District of Florida and Jeffrey Epstein's lawyers, only binds the Southern District of Florida. It does not bind the Southern District of New York. So David Marcus, who's a very fine criminal defense lawyer, is saying the feds are the feds. It applies nationwide. That argument has not worked yet. Could it work at the U.S. Supreme Court? Possibly. But there's another problem with that non-prosecution agreement. It's a non-prosecution agreement between Jeffrey Epstein and the feds. It was not involving Ghislaine Maxwell per se. Jeffrey Epstein said, let's include everyone else who's involved with this matter. Now, can you do that? Can you give immunity essentially to everyone who's not even a party to the action, who's not been charged? I don't think so. I think that's
You haven't
way
done
too
it.
broad.
You've never done it, right?
I've never done it. Yeah, how do you say, like, no matter who else we find who's involved in any way in the future, they'll be immune too? What? That is extremely broad. That should never be agreed to by any prosecutor. So you have that problem, and you have the problem of the fact that it was only in agreement with the Southern District of Florida, which is thousands of miles away from New York.
Curious to see if the Supreme Court just wants to take it up, argue it, hear it. Maybe. We'll see. Just an interesting development nonetheless. Dave Aronberg, thank you so much for taking the time. It was great seeing you.
Thanks for having me, Jesse. Great show.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.